China has said this is just a weather balloon that has veered off course. Why is the Pentagon convinced that this is a surveillance balloon? And then can you give us a little bit more on the status of the balloon? You said it's in the central U.S. What state? Do you have any guidance for people as they see this balloon, or they're trying to photograph it, or maybe try and interfere with it?
Sure. Thanks, Tara. So first of all, we are aware of the PRC's statement. However, the fact is we know that it's a surveillance balloon, and I'm not going to be able to be more specific than that. We do know that the balloon has violated U.S. airspace and international law, which is unacceptable. And so we've conveyed this directly to the PRC at multiple levels. And in terms of specific locations, I'm not going to be able to go into specific locations, again, other than to say it's moving eastward at this time. Yeah, you had a follow-up?
Well, just a quick follow-up on, as people start to see the balloon, do you have any guidance for, should they try not to interfere, not photograph?
So the balloon is currently assessed to be at about 60,000 feet. So again, well above the range of civilian air traffic, or where civilian air traffic would normally fly. Certainly aware that there are cameras, civilian-owned commercial cameras that could spot this balloon. In terms of guidance to folks, again, this is something that NORAD is closely monitoring. We do assess at this time that it does not pose a physical threat, as I mentioned, to people on the ground. So we'll just leave it at that. Jennifer.
General Ryder, who is controlling this balloon right now?
Again, we know that this is a Chinese balloon, but beyond that, I'm not going to have specifics.
But is it, you say that it's moving eastward and it's over the continental U.S., it's not over Montana anymore. Is the Chinese government controlling the movement of the balloon, or is it just floating with airstreams?
Thanks, Jennifer. So I'm not going to go into any specific intelligence that we may have. Again, we know this is a Chinese balloon and that it has the ability to maneuver, but I'll just leave it at that.
And once it's over a body of water, will you shoot it down?
Again, right now we're monitoring the situation closely, reviewing options, but beyond that, I'm not going to have any additional information. We go to Tony.
One quickie on the balloon. Can you confirm the photos that are out there that this is not the man in the moon and that is the actual balloon?
Thanks, Tony. So certainly aware of photos being posted online. I'm not going to get into the business of confirming whether or not those are, where those photos come from. Again, I can tell you that the U.S. government, NORAD, is monitoring this closely, and we will continue to review options.
How close was the U.S. to was the president to ordering a shoot down of the balloon?
Yeah, so again, I'm not going to get into internal discussions within the White House. Again, right now we assess that there is no threat, a physical threat or military threat to people on the ground. So we're continuing to monitor, and we'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Two questions on the Chinese balloon. So there is a speculation that the Chinese balloon flew over Japanese airspace before reaching the continental U.S. Can you confirm that?
I've seen those press reports. Again, as we acknowledged in our statement that we posted last night, we have seen this type of balloon activity elsewhere before. But again, I'm not going to get into intelligence, and I'm not going to have any further information to provide.
Secondly, how will this incident affect the Secretary's future engagement with Chinese counterpart to maintain the open lines of the communication?
I think we've been very clear that we're always open to maintaining an open line of communication with the PRC, and in that regard, nothing has changed. Thank you. Let me go to Phil, and then I'll come over to Qasim.
Is the position of the balloon classified?
Phil, right now, what we're not going to do is get into a hour-by-hour location of the balloon. Again, we're monitoring it closely. As I mentioned, right now, it's over the center of the continental United States. That's about as specific as I'm going to get.
But I understand it might be inconvenient, but does the public not have a right to know if the balloon
the public
is over their
certainly
state?
has the ability to look up in the sky and see where the balloon is. Thank you. Qasim?
General, you said the balloon is maneuverable. So does that mean that it's not drifting?
So the balloon is maneuverable. Clearly, it's violated U.S. airspace. And again, we've communicated that fact to the PRC.
if possible, can you tell us if the balloon, when it entered the U.S. airspace, has it changed its course in any way?
The balloon has changed its course, which is again why we're monitoring it, but that's about as specific as I can get. Thank you. Go to Matt.
So you've said at this point the balloon doesn't pose any risks to citizens. How is it that the U.S. can assess that, given that the balloon is at such an altitude, without actually getting eyes on it up close and assessing the equipment that's on board? And secondly, are there any alternatives being considered to shooting it down? Is there any option to take this balloon out of the sky intact to maybe get a better look at that equipment?
Yeah. So again, this is a surveillance balloon, operating at about 60,000 feet. Clearly, we did a very close assessment in terms of what it's doing. And as I mentioned, military commanders have assessed that there is no physical or military threat to people on the ground. And so in that regard, we'll continue to monitor. In terms of way ahead, we will continue to review options, but I'm not going to have anything further to provide on that. So thank you. Ma'am.
Thank you, Pat. You said that this is violating our airspace, so why not take it down?
Yeah, so, clearly as we assess options and considering the size of the payload on this, looking at the potential for debris and the impact on civilians on the ground or property damage, again, running through the various factors and looking at in terms of does it pose a potential risk to people while in the air. And right now, as I mentioned, we assess that it does not pose a risk to people on the ground as it currently is traversing the continental United States. And so out of an abundance of caution, cognizant of the potential impact to civilians on the ground from a debris field, right now we're going to continue to monitor and review options.
And if I may, you mentioned that we've seen this kind of activity before, so why are we sharing this one, and why last night if you were following it for a few days? Is this some sort of sign that we should take from China ahead of Blinken's visit or from the activity that we had in the Philippines?
Yeah, so in terms of any hypotheticals about messaging from PRC, I'd refer you to them on that front. Again, I think what makes this different is the duration and the length of which it has been over U.S. territory. But beyond that, I'm not going to be able to go into any more specifics. Mike.
Thanks, Pat. Yesterday, a senior defense official said that the intelligence gathering capability of this balloon will be no better than any Chinese satellite in a low Earth orbit. If that's the case, why would Beijing go through the trouble and expense to send this balloon on such a journey?
Yeah, I'd have to refer you back to the PRC on that.
Any opinion why?
Again, look, we're monitoring this. As I mentioned, it's violated U.S. airspace. It's violated international law. We've communicated that back to the government of China. But again, I'd refer you back to China in terms of.
But I assume that that the Pentagon is trying to figure this out itself. Why they're bothering to do this if it's offering no better intelligence gathering than from a satellite, right?
Yeah. Again, I mean that's a statement, not a question. So. Yeah.
Question mark at the end of it then.
Yeah. Again, I'm not going to have anything other to provide. So, ma'am. Yeah. Go to her and then come back to Nancy here.
I was wondering, is there any way that the Pentagon is able to gauge how long it could potentially loiter, comparing to balloons that have been in the past? And, how long do you anticipate that it could loiter?
Sure. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we'll continue to monitor it. Right now, we assess that it'll probably be over the United States for a few days, but we'll continue to monitor, review our options, and keep you updated as we can. Thank you. Okay, let me go to Nancy here.
Hi, General. I want to go back to a couple of things you said. You said several times that the U.S. is reviewing its options. I'd like some clarity. Is the option of shooting down the balloon, particularly as it's going over more populated areas, off the table? is that still amongst the options that the U.S. military is considering? And if so, under what conditions would it do so?
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. So at this stage, what I can tell you is, again, we're reviewing options. I'm not going to go into more specifics than that. And when and if there's any updates to provide, we'll let you know.
It's been ruled out shooting.
Again, we're monitoring it and we're reviewing options. I'll just leave it there.
And then a senior defense official yesterday said that similar incidents had happened under the previous administration, and yet some of those administration officials have come forward and said they're not familiar with it. Is there any way you could give us more details on when it's happened, over whether it was over the continental U.S. or over U.S. territories? Is that something you could potentially take to provide the public more details about the extent that these things happen?
So what I would tell you right now is that information is classified. I'm not able to provide it, other than I can confirm that there have been other incidents where balloons did come close to or cross over U.S. territory.
I just want to reiterate something that Phil said earlier, that given that it's not classified and the public can see it, I just ask that you take the question that we have more specifics on where it is, given that there's no clear security reason by your own estimation in terms of keeping that information from the public.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're just not going to get into an hour by hour where the balloon is. So we will do our best to keep you and the public informed in general terms on where the balloon is, and try to be helpful in that regard.
Guessing game where people think it's flying over. I just think some fidelity would be in everybody's
Understood. And again, I think a key point here to make, and to purposefully belabor the point, which is that, again, as this balloon traverses the continental United States, we assess that it currently does not pose a physical or military risk to people on the ground. So we will continue to monitor, we'll continue to review our options, and provide information and updates as we're able to. So, Jennifer.
If it approaches Washington, D.C., will you shoot it down?
Again, Jennifer, we're reviewing options, but I'm not going to get into hypotheticals or speculate on potential future actions. So let me go to the back of the room here, and then I'll come up to Joe.
Thank you, General. Thinking about the route of the balloon, was it impossible for the DoD to deal with the balloon before it reached to the airspace of the United States?
Yeah. So we've been monitoring the balloon. We are aware. Again, as I mentioned, it is a maneuverable craft, and we continue to assess and make appropriate decisions based on how we're going to address, what we perceive as a potential threat or not. The safety and security of the American people is paramount, and so again, at this time, we assess that it does not pose a physical threat to people on the ground. We'll continue to monitor it, and we'll continue to review options. Thank you. Let me go ahead and go to Joe here, and then we'll come back to this side of the room.
So you said that this is the first time this isn't the first time we've seen a balloon fly over the continental U.S. In the past, has it flown over other sensitive areas, such as military bases? You haven't been very specific. It's just the continental U.S.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I haven't been very specific because that information is classified, and I'm just not going to be able to talk about it. So thank you. Idris.
The Canadian Defense Ministry yesterday said they were tracking a second potential spy balloon. Are you tracking a second potential incident? And when the balloon was coming, I guess what I'm confused about is, when were there discussions to shoot down the balloon? Were there any discussions about shooting down the balloon when it was not over the United States, when it was potentially over international waters? Or were the discussions only when it entered U.S. airspace?
Yeah, thanks, Idris. So on your first question, we are tracking one balloon. So in regards to statements by Canada, I'd refer you back to them on that. In terms of the discussions about whether or not to shoot down this balloon, that was an option, right? And so that was something that was taken into consideration. Again, because we assess that currently it does not pose a physical or military risk to people on the ground, for now we're continuing to monitor and review options. Thank you. I'll go back to Ellie, and then we'll come up here.
Thank you. How big is the balloon that you're tracking? And have you guys picked up, is it leaving anything in its wake, like sensors?
Yeah, so on your latter question, I'm not going to get into intelligence. We do continue to monitor the balloon. We do know that it is a surveillance balloon. In terms of the size, I'm not able to get into the specifics other than to say that it is big enough that, again, in reviewing our approach, we do recognize that any potential debris field would be significant and potentially cause civilian injuries or deaths or significant property damage. So again, this is part of the calculus in terms of our overall assessment. But again, we'll continue to monitor it. We'll continue to review our options and keep you updated as able. Let me go here and then over to here.
Thank you. Following up on the balloon question, during your conversation with the Chinese, have they indicated to you what is inside the balloon to prove the point that it's a civilian balloon or weather monitoring thing? And does that assessment differs from your assessment of what is inside the balloon, what it's trying to do? And secondly, on an India question, this week India and US launched a initiative on critical emerging technologies. This has quite a bit of defense component in it. Can you give us some more details about it and how it's going to strengthen, build up your relationship with India?
Sure. On your second question, I'll have to take that because I just don't have that information in front of me. On the first question, I appreciate it. As I mentioned, we have contacted the PRC. I'm not going to get into their reaction. I'd refer you to them for that. But we have clearly communicated that this balloon is violating U.S. airspace and international law and that this is unacceptable. Thank you. Go over here and then go over here.
Thank you, sir. Is the Pentagon looking at any possibility of maybe altering the course of the balloon to take it to a location where they could shoot it down in a rural area?
Again, monitoring, we're reviewing options, but I'm not going to go into any further specifics. Thank you. Sir?
Considering that this is a surveillance balloon, as you said, does it have ability to collect very sensitive data, given that it flies over nuclear sites in the state of Montana?
Yeah, so again, I'm not going to get into intelligence. As we mentioned in our statement last night, once the balloon was detected, we acted immediately to protect against the collection of sensitive information, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you. Phil?
Is there any possibility that there's any nuclear or radioactive material aboard the balloon, or is there anything that's aboard the balloon that makes you believe that it could pose a risk if it were shot down?
Short answer is no. But again, right now we do not assess that the balloon in its current configuration at approximately 60,000 feet poses a physical or military threat to people on the ground. Thank you.
Two questions on the balloon. First, on maneuverability. Can it maneuver up and down as well as laterally? In other words, turn as well as change altitude? And in terms of tracking, how are you tracking this? Is it radar? Is it aircraft? And is it continuous tracking or is it more intermittent than that?
Yeah, thanks, Oren. So beyond saying that we are continuously tracking the balloon, I'm not going to go into the specifics in terms of how we track, other than to say that we have multiple means at our disposal to do that. In terms of more specifics on the balloon, again, I'm not going to get into intelligence, again, other than it is maneuverable, and I'll just leave it at that. All right, two more questions, Phil, and then Qasim.
The Chinese, you said it changed course. Did it change course following your disclosure of its presence over the United States? And secondly, is to the point about its capabilities, how is it powered? How is it moving? How is it maneuverable?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So again, on your latter question, I'm not going to get into intelligence. Clearly, it's a balloon that has a payload underneath it. I'll just leave it at that. What's that?
What do you mean by payload?
It's got a large payload underneath the surveillance component, underneath the actual balloon piece of it. So just leave it at that. And then in terms of the maneuverability, again, all I can say right now is at this point, again, it's moving eastward across the United States, currently over about the central United States.
Did it change course after your disclosure, or did it change further beyond?
I don't have that information. Yep.
Payload, that sounds like munitions or something that would pose a threat to
No,
US
again,
citizens.
there is it is a surveillance balloon, right? So there is a surveillance capability underneath this large balloon, right? So look at a blimp has a basket, right? So there's a basket underneath it in layman's terms. So again, large enough to be concerning if there were a debris field. So, all right, Qasim, last question.
Has there been any mill-to-mill communication with China with respect to the balloon?
Again, we've communicated at multiple levels, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Yeah.
Is it is it munitions?
It is a surveillance balloon. Again, does not pose, we currently assess it does not pose a physical or military risk to people on the ground.
Okay, what could payload that? Is it an engine? I'm trying
Again,
to
I can't go into more details. So, okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.